There we go. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Pastrami Nation, the meat of pop culture. My name is Nolan Smith, and joining me from Pastrami Nation today is our very own Eddie Aguirre.
Hello, everybody.
And we have two very special guests today. We're so excited to have them here. We have Jhod Cardinal and Adam Scorgie, the filmmaking unit whose most recent work includes the film we're going to be talking about today, Inmate #1, The Rise of Danny Trejo. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello. Thanks for having us on.
Hello.
Hey, we appreciate you being here.
Oh, my pleasure.
Now, we did get to check out an advanced version of the film, so we won't do spoilers, of course, but wow, it was really good. So let's go ahead and we'll jump right into the questions, and of course, I'll go ahead and just give you a disclaimer. Myself and Eddie right there, we're both very huge Danny Trejo fans, so this was like a dream come true to be able to check out this documentary that you guys created and have a dive into this man's life. So let's jump into it. So first off, let's talk about you two. How did you two start working together, and what projects have you collaborated on in the past?
Well, Joe, I'll let you dive into that one, bud.
Sure. So Adam and I have known each other for about 10 years now. Back in the day when we were both trying to slug it out and making films, junior people, we had crossed paths. Adam had actually a great documentary called The Union, which is based in the marijuana space. And then he had a follow-up, and that follow-up was a fabulous film, but the traction just wasn't there. It kind of got bounced around because of corporate takeovers and stuff like that. And I just started my own company. I said, hey, Adam, man, we've worked together when I was a junior sales guy, but I have my own company. I'd love to work on the culture high with you. So he gave me a shot, and it was actually the very first film I ever took on. Thankfully, it was 6 weeks later when I was talking to Netflix and learned that Netflix was opening up internationally and pitched the film. And I got to call Adam within a very short period of time of grabbing the film saying, hey, are you interested in a worldwide Netflix deal? Yeah. So from there, so that's kind of how we started. And, we quickly just looked at some of the math and where we've been at since that day. We've done $3.5 million worth of productions together, and we have another about $3.5 million slated. And I think that's about 10 projects. So it's been a great ride and a lot of trust between our two companies. So here we are today, bringing you Inmate #1, The Rise of Danny Trejo.
Yeah, and Joe, whenever he presents these things like he did with the culture, and he's done it a few times when he's like, so Adam, would you be happy with like this amount, like say $100,000 and then a deal? I'm like, oh, that would be great. And he's like, well, I got twice that with Netflix.
Wow.
Like, yes. Like,
hey, that's awesome. You're already like, yeah.
He always goes with like the minimal expectations and it comes in. But now I'm gonna be
good life lesson.
So like if he doesn't do that the next time, I'll kind of be like, hey, where's like the doubling the amount?
Waiting for that next part. Yeah.
I was trying to joke him.
So with this film going into it, what were your guys' roles, each of you?
So I was the producer, and Jhod is the producer as well, but Jhod works more on the distribution side and securing the right deal in place. And then I'm more the producer that puts out the fires. Hence why I like list Creative Hustler in my handle and my emails. That my job is to put the money together to produce it, take care of our creative team, and then manage the talent and the talent's agent, which can be a lot of heavy lifting at times. But Danny was great and easy to work with. And most of the fires came, just with dealing regular production. Like we couldn't get into certain prisons that we wanted to film. So we had to overcome those hurdles, and then, keeping Danny's agent happy. So that's really our roles. But the creative genius behind it would be director Brett Harvey that is not with us today. But he is the guy that wrote it, directed it, edited it, colored it, did a lot of the creative heavy lifting.
Oh, how cool. Wow. Well, you answered my next question. So, Eddie, go ahead and jump to your next question because he already got me.
What is the deciding factor when you're making a film and you come up with the subject? What is the deciding factor? And what about Danny Trejo were you interested in?
What's not to be interested with Danny Trejo? Like when you look at his personal life and what he's overcome, I mean, he has one of the most remarkable transformation of human character that can ever be put into film. And we put that in our synopsis. Is that like, if you scripted this in a movie, you know, where a guy that's like doing armed robberies and heroin when he's 12 and then goes to prison and turns his life around and becomes, you know, a recovery specialist and then becomes arguably the most successful Mexican-American actor in Hollywood history, you'd be like, that movie is so far-fetched. Get out of here. Who can accomplish that? But Danny really did do that. So when it was first brought to us, it was from another producer on the team, Rocky Medalliar. He came. He was working with Danny on a movie, a sci-fi movie in Utah that I helped out with. And he was like, hey, Adam, he's like, you know, you do all the docs. Like, we should do a doc together about Danny. And I was like, well, I only knew Danny as the actor then. So I was like, well, I don't know if he can really justify like a film, right? Like, I don't know. Like, I knew him from Heat and Machete and Desperado. And then Rocky's like, man, you got to check out his personal life and what this man has overcome. So then I looked at that and I was like, man, we have to tell this guy's story. It's incredible. So we called director Brett Harvey, and I was like, Brett, look into this. And Brett did all this research. Was like, he's like, Adam, he's like, I have to tell the story. Let me put together a pitch materials and presentation, and then we'll fly down and meet Danny. And Brett created this pitch book that was just immaculate and just did so much research and digging into Danny. And when we brought it to Danny, he went through that pitch book and was like, when do we start rolling camera? Right. He's like, now you just have to convince my agent that we want to do this. So then that's when my heavy lifting came in. I had to secure financing and convince Gloria's agent and that we were the right team for the job. And, but really when looking for somebody like Danny's story, Danny's one is a dream come true when you get it, especially then once you meet the man and you meet who he is. Like, some people have these great stories, but when you meet them in person, you're like, oh man, they're not a great interview, or they're going to be tough to pull this information from. Danny had all the above, you know, great charisma, super nice guy, really funny, and a once in a lifetime story that we just had to tell. So it was a no brainer for us to put this together.
Yeah. It's incredible how you could look at this character, look at his characters, and then actually find out who the person really is. It was quite an interesting story.
Right. And, you know, we've always seen Danny Trejo as, you know, the ultimate tough guy. I mean, he's that guy you do not want to see down a dark alley because you're probably not walking away from it. Yeah. Because he's Danny Trejo. But this documentary, it gives us a different look. Like, we get to see this man in a very different light throughout his life. Can you talk to us about like the different, you know, chapters that you've seen of Danny Trejo?
Well, as I kind of mentioned there, I mean, you have what a lot of people don't know is his early childhood of like drugs and armed robberies, which he really kind of discovered through the process of the film. Why he was so infatuated with his uncle and why he went down that path is that he was just really looking for a father figure, right? His dad was a hardworking, you know, Latino immigrant that, you know, it was just that generation. My grandfather was like that too, that he's like, I provide for this family, don't ask for anything else, right? Like, kids are to be seen and not heard, and I pay the bills and I put a roof over your head and that's it. So Danny really was looking for that father figure, that role model, and his uncle Gilbert. Like, if you're a young man, how is that not good looking, well-built guy? You know, girls love him. Men.
He's exciting. Him. He's exactly what you want to be.
He's got money. You know, you're like, that's what I want. I'm like, he's got beautiful women, wicked cars. Like, he's good looking. People respect him. He's feared. Mm-hmm. So Danny's like, I want that. And then his uncle like taught him like how to, like, this is how you do robberies. And then you saw obviously Danny, how he survived prison. And then the biggest thing for me is the transformation that he made outside of it. And you really see how this guy, like, he made a promise, you know, when facing execution, that I will turn my life around and I will give back to my fellow man. And how many people don't live up to their promises? I keep making the promise I'm going to get back in the gym here and get back like I was in my 20s, and that lasts for 5 days and I quit. And that's like, you know, 54 years later, that man has honored that promise and stayed sober and always helping others, and always helping others in a way that isn't manufactured or just getting a tax write-off. This man legitimately is always helping others. Like, the perfect example is what happened here in the last year, where there was that accident and that child, that special needs child, was trapped in the back seat. And when you watch the video, it was like a street cam. You see other people are cringing. Unfortunately, a lot of people are pulling out their phone to film the incident. Danny Trejo, 76 years old, is sprinting towards the problem to see if somebody needs help, right? And then discovers the child in the back. You can't train that or pretend to be that. That, like, we as a team, when we saw this, we're like, that's so Danny Trejo. Other people are like, oh my God, you know, Hollywood tough guy comes today and rescues the kid. And we're like, yeah, that's Danny. That's his true, that's who that man is today. Right. So when we were able to, we knew showing people that you would see the side of Danny. Like, if you don't know Danny, you think he's the character he plays, but that isn't him a lot of the times. Like, the man he is now is very different than the man he portrays. And that was one of the kind of the battles we had with his agent, is she felt everybody knew that about Danny already. And we're like, man, most people, I would say 9 out of 10 people recognize his face, but don't know anything about his story. So it was one of the big things we said, when we tell this in the documentary, it is going to have people look at Danny in a whole new way. And they're going to, if they didn't love him before, they're definitely going to love him after they watch the documentary.
Right.
Absolutely.
So was that
much
your
respect,
vision?
yeah.
Was that your vision going into this movie? Was it to show another side, another light of Danny Trejo? Or were you trying to appease him as Danny Trejo? What was your vision?
Nope. It was, well, you know, I'm only speaking for Brett because I've heard him talk a few years that, but Brett really wanted to show who Danny Trejo is, the human being behind the layers of the bad guy persona, right? And when you meet Danny the first time, the guy is joking and like, he doesn't have that. He doesn't try to come up and be like, hey, I'm Danny Trejo. Like, none of that. He's joking right from the get-go, right? Like, he's diffusing any kind of hostility. As we kind of mentioned in the documentary, he trained that for years, where people were afraid of you, Danny. They're timid. Like, he now does the opposite when you engage him, right? Is he really makes you feel welcome. So I know Brett from the get-go is like, man, I have to show this tremendous side of Danny that a lot of people don't know. You know, he's nothing like the stereotype.
I noticed that every conversation that he would be in, he would lead with just being the funny guy, a laugh, a smirk. Something funny would come out of his mouth before he would talk about anything else.
And that actually was a struggle for Brett in the editing, because it's almost become almost a defense mechanism for Danny, because at times, even when he gets really emotional, like when he talks about his Uncle Gilbert dying of drugs, he almost chuckles a little bit, and then you kind of see him remorseful, right? He is so, we kind of found out or discovered during the process of making the film that, you know, because Danny lost a lot of his childhood because he was, you know, an addict and in and out of juvenile halls and prison, that he's kind of a big kid now, right? Always joking and having fun, that it's almost like he's enjoying his childhood now in his 70s. So he is, you know, and I think Brett did a brilliant job of capturing that and demonstrating that on camera in the documentary.
Yeah, Adam, to add to, one thing that was focused on was there's a big ability to just flush the film with a whole bunch of celebrities, because Danny has worked with everyone. He's done 350 plus films. So the narrative, we never took it that way. Brett did a great job. Adam, everyone made a conscious decision that this was about this man's story, and not just selling that glitz of Hollywood. So you get to see the other parts of his life. It breathes in there. So we're not rushing through the early part, just so you can get to that stacked end where you see him associating with Mel Gibson and all those Hollywood people. So, you know, a lot of, you know, there's no narration through this documentary. Everything's told from the people. A lot of Danny's childhood friends who we were able to track down are in there. And I really give a lot of credit to the filmmaking team because they did find the deep story that isn't just for the Trejo fan, but for people outside of Danny's circle who just recognize the face but can't quite place him. I think they'll see this trailer and go, wow, that's pretty interesting. And I had no clue about this gentleman.
That's what made this story so unique. Was it wasn't the celebrities that were telling the story. It was from his own family, from his own backyard, from the people he grew up with and the people who were in the trenches with him at the times when he was struggling.
Yeah, and that was a conscious choice. And Joe, thank you for it. I mean, that was something Brett really battled with, right? Because, you know, Danny's management team really, they're like, wow, we need to get to the Hollywood part quicker and stuff. And Brett was like, no, man. He's like, so many biodocs rush the through line story, and really it will pay off more if we really understand where Danny came from to when we deliver to who he is and who he's, you know, evolved to become now. So Joe, thank you for bringing that up. That's a good point where Brett fought hard for that. He kept saying, man, like, don't lose that. I'm telling you, that makes the payoff just that much more appealing. And as a lot of people, a lot of people, when they see Danny, they recognize his face, but they don't really know it all. So if we really, and it was tough to find, because Danny has, like, a lot of his friends are either dead or in jail too, right? That he grew up with. They're hard at 76. There's not a lot of people, you know, as Danny says, if you're an addict, you know, you either go insane, go to jail, die. So a lot of his friends were not around anymore. So we had to find, you know, people that had served time with him and close friends and his own family and stuff to be able to put a lot of those pieces together.
Yeah. Right. And that was going to be my next question about, you know, how did you, you know, take that list, that massive list of, you know, people in Hollywood, but also of his family and friends and everything. How did you shorten that down to who you guys decided to choose and speak to? Because I felt like they were all very powerful. Every word that they said really had an impact in there, you know, from, you know, the celebrities, Cheech Marin and whatnot, to the people closest to him, you know, his sister and people like that.
So that would be in the hands of our wizard, Mr. Brett Harvey. He went through the list in detail with Danny and went through and said, Danny, like, you know, what kind of, you know, out of the celebrities that you're friend, like, who are really your friends? And then Danny would be like, well, you know, I admire these guys, but they won't know much other than when we worked on a movie or these people. So we went through the ones, and, you know, Cheech and him are from the same place. They both grew up in Pacoima, right? So we were like, certain ones like that, we're like, okay, perfect. Plus, we know with docs, whenever you interview a comedian, right, or someone that has the comedic background, they can throw in those elements, right? Like Cheech has that great joke, right? When we're like, how many films? Like, I don't know, a lot. And we're like, over 3. And he's like, no shit. And he's like, wow, but most of them are porno, so that doesn't really count, right? Like, you know, just throwing. So Brett really went through that list with a fine-tooth comb with Danny and said, like, who's important and who is not. And then again, you know, some of the other ones, like, you know, management, other people like, well, I don't know if we should have so much family. And Brett fought hard for that. We said, look, Danny's got his kids' names tattooed on him. Their portraits on his back. Like, his family is very important. We need to show that, right? And that this amazing Hollywood actor is also a great father figure. That was a fascinating point when you interview his children, that his children are like, we didn't know, like, all the horror stories you hear of Danny growing up, that was before they were born. So like, we never had an addict in the family. Like, our dad was already in recovery for years by then. So we just had a great dad that was funny and, you know, had tattoos. And then even when we'd hear him talk about stories, we're like, you really did all that? Like, that's crazy. Like, they even look at it as kind of this, like, mythical previous Danny Trejo to the Danny Trejo they grew up with as their father.
Because that transformation was so drastic. Yeah.
So drastic. Like, they, even as they tell the stories, and they've all heard them before, and that's why everyone can articulate them so well, because like, they've all heard them as kids growing up. They're like, can you believe our dad robbed a place with a grenade and, like, did all this? And, like, so those were all, again, things that Brett really flushed out. And in the questioning, Brett is so thorough in his questioning. He does like 2.5 hours with each individual. So we picked the best elements. So that's why I often think, and like, I work with different directors, but when he has talking heads on the screen, every word and moment they have is an impactful one, because he goes through those 2.5, 3 hour interviews with a fine tooth comb, and he picks the best minute or the best 2 minutes or 30 seconds that they have. And then it flows all very nicely in the finished product.
Wow.
Awesome.
In this film, you go on location to specific places. You mentioned Pacoima, San Fernando area, but what about the prisons, the high-risk areas? What was that like?
So that was fun. So we got denied by all the California prisons. For whatever reason, they would not let us back in there. They have a new guy that was in charge of media. And I don't know, we even offered, like, for Danny to speak to all the inmates, to offer the prison something. And we just couldn't get in there. We got a letter from the governor, but the prisons are privately owned. So they're like, good for you. You got a letter from the governor. Thumbs up to you. And then, so we cheated it, and we went to Phoenix prison, and that's where he spoke to the inmates there. Caitlin, that worked with Danny, Caitlin and her mom worked there, and they gave us great access there. But when we went in, it's interesting. So they wouldn't let us into high security or high risk, obviously, or maximum security, because they said, Adam, like, if you get held at knife point or something, like, we're not allowed to treat your life any more important than the inmate. So it becomes very difficult if we're put into a hostile situation. So we were kind of like, I was kind of, as a producer, I'm like, that's okay with me. We can kind of just go in the regular prison. I'm not interested in going in there anyway. But even in the low security side, like, there was one time we're filming these dramatic shots because we couldn't shoot any inmates' faces, right? That's why when Danny walks in, you can only see behind, and you see the silhouettes of them walking or on the payphone or in the yard. There's one time Brett's getting this great shot. It's in the film of them walking across the yard in slow motion. You see all their feet and stuff. And there's one time we're looking, there was one prison guard with us, and then there's our 3 filmmakers, and there's like 20 inmates. And I was like, shit, man, I hope things don't pop off, because like we're vastly outnumbered right now, right? And I was like, and the prison guard goes, he's like, Adam, he's like, these are all low risk guys that like they're getting out, some of them within 6 months to a year to 5 years. He's like, and if they even hint violence and even look at you wrong, they'll get years tacked onto their sentence, so nothing's gonna happen. And I was like, but still, you're looking like, I'm like, okay, you say that, but I've watched prison movies, man, and it doesn't always work like that. So
You know, Adam, sorry, I was gonna say, Adam, to add to that story too is when we had the world premiere at Mill Valley, some of Danny's friends who he spent time with at prison, it was the first time they got to see the film, and they took their phones out videotaping the prison footage because they just thought it was so crazy, like the drone footage of San Quentin and all that various stuff. And it was crazy to see these guys who'd spent time in the prisons who were freaking out seeing their prison and how it was captured on screen. I was like, that must be a good tribute, because these guys couldn't help but pull their phones out and tape it right from the screen.
Which, Joe, that brings to a great point, is that shows you how hard it is. And we mentioned in the film for Danny to go back to these prisons, right? Like some of the other, like Mario that's in the film that served time as well, he won't go back to that. Like even when Danny goes to speak, Mario waits in the hotel. He'll go with Danny on the trip, but he doesn't want to go back to the prison, right? They hate going in those places. Like, so the fact that Danny is always putting himself in there to go help the other inmates, just to give them a day, right? Just to give them, you know, some kind of hope and to look forward to something, really, really lets you know the how far Danny's willing to go to help others, because most people don't want to do that, right? And he constantly does it. You know, and he's 76 years old, right? While he's busy as shit, he makes a point.
Awesome.
There's a point that didn't make it in the film that he was invited to the Golden Globes to be like a guest in kind of the front row, to show that they were being more diverse, right, in their audience and stuff a few years ago. And Danny was like, no, I can't go. And they're like, why? What do you got? His agent was like, what do you have booked? He's like, well, I'm going to speak at a prison. And she's like, you want to go back to prison versus going to the Golden Globes? He's like, yeah. He's like, that's my goal in life, is to help others. So that is the commitment I made. I'm going back to prison. Only Danny would want to go back to prison. Yeah. That's when you start thinking of yourself is like, I think I'm a pretty good guy, but I wouldn't be going back to prison. I'm like, I'm going to the Golden Globes. Right?
Do other prisoners try to size him up, or they look at him as a celebrity or somebody that he has been in their place before?
Danny does not get, so Danny has the gift that he truly believes that he was given through his life of turmoil growing up, is that he can really reach people and connect with people in a way that, unless you had done the time he had done and been through what he'd done, you can't connect. Because he said, look, when I go to speak with a group of youth, the hardest thing to get youth nowadays is to pay attention. But he's like, as soon as I walk in the room, I have their attention because they've seen me in Heat or Machete or Desperado or Dusk Till Dawn. He's like, then the second most challenging part dealing with young youth offenders or inmates is having their respect, right? Because people are like, you don't know Holmes, you haven't been through it. And he's like, oh, I know. I was facing 3 counts of the gas chamber. I was up for execution. I was involved in prison riots. I ran protection rings. I've been stabbed. I've stabbed people. I know exactly what you're going through. So when you tell me you can't turn your life around, that's bullshit, because I know you can, because he was facing the death penalty and his life turned around. So he looks at it now as like, he wouldn't, as he said, he's like, I wouldn't want to go through it all again. But he's like, I've truly been given a gift in order to help people and give back. So he's like, it would be a sin for me not to continue to do that, because I'm able to connect and, you know, and relate to people that nobody else can because of my experience and what I've been able to accomplish in the film industry.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and
Eddie,
I mean, go ahead.
As you say, Eddie, he also had 10 years where he was a counselor before he did anything in Hollywood. So he was well established. And I've said a few times, Danny's just world class. He was like a world class gangster. He was a world class counselor, and he's a world class actor. Everything he's done.
And now he's a world class restaurateur.
Yeah,
Oh
he's
yeah,
just
yeah.
everything
true.
he does is he does well. Yeah, he puts everything he has into it. He's so passionate, and it shows everywhere. You know.
Absolutely. Now, for location, how was it for the crew and everybody to come out to Southern California and film out here? What was your experience like?
Well, that part was awesome. That was back when you could travel and it wasn't the new norm, right? It was great. We could come out and film, and it was nice, and we'd stop it in and out, and it was really cool to get. You get to do it with Danny, which was great, right? Is that's elements again that Brett fought really hard for. Is like when you have Danny just in the car driving around Pacoima. You know, a lot of people that know Danny super well and they kind of take for granted. They're like, man, that's kind of boring. We see Danny drive around all the time. They're like, you do. But the average audience doesn't get to feel like they're sitting in the car with Danny and him telling you, oh, yeah, we put a shotgun in a guy's mouth there, and we used to rob them all the time. And there's a poker game here where we did like,
Right.
you know, all of us are like, what? We're like, you know, but
Exactly.
like, to Danny, that was like no thing. He's like, oh, yeah, we put a gun in that guy's mouth really quick and stopped him, and we pointed a gun over here, and we got a couple $100 there. And yeah, it was, you know, a great, tremendous part to go live that with him, right? And really seeing how the community embraces him now, where, you know, like you see in the thing where he's whistling, he's like, hey, Machete says stay in school, right? And they're like, everywhere he's driving, they're like, Machete, Machete, like, you know, and even we just by fluke, we got that scene where the cops just come up to him and start hugging him, right? And they're like, what's up? They're like, years ago, no cops came up and hugged him. He's like, they came and beat the shit out of him. And as he said, he's like, and it's because I deserved it. I was a criminal, right? So he's like, now, you know, one place that he used to you know, vandalize and terrorize now has a mural, and they idolize him as somebody that is totally transformed in his character and turned into somebody that you can admire and look up to.
Yeah. Well, you talk about him going back to prisons, but he never left his community. He stayed in his community. I think his mother's house, he still lives in that house, or he owns it.
He owns it. He lives 2 blocks from there. She's like just around the corner in his house, and he's right there. And he actually even has a yellow sign because he's kind of like a weird, it's hard to see his address. So they put it there so that people that know, like that work with him or want to see him can come, like his house is right there, right? Like he is right in the community when you say that he hasn't left at all. And then he has stayed to his roots of Pacoima, 2 blocks away from where he grew up.
Wow. What do you want the audience members who see this film to get out of it?
Well, I think originally, you know, we wanted them to see the other side of Danny Trejo and really, you know, be inspired and have that message of hope that you can turn your life around, and that, you know, you're not a product of your environment and where you come from. If you have if you set yourself on the right path and you have a few good moral compasses help guide you and keep you on that path, you can transform to just about anything. And I think that message, you know, it hasn't shifted as much now that the film has about to come out, but with everything that's going on right now, I think the world needs a little bit more Danny Trejo. We need some more positive stories of people that have been through hell, and they've been broke, they've been addicted to heroin, they've been in prison, they've been facing execution, and you can. And, you know, as Danny beats home in the trailer and in the film, and, you know, Jhod and I here today, is that, you know, he truly believes and can almost demonstrate it from the moment he got out of prison, that everything good that has happened to him is a direct result of helping somebody else. So if you can do that little bit extra, instead of spitting on what people did wrong or what they might have said wrong or whatever, look at how you can help your fellow man in your community, and good things will come your way. You know, him helping a sponsor is how he got on his first movie set. Him helping his local neighborhood is how he got his first landscaping company when he first got out of prison, right? He helped an elderly lady that couldn't look after her yard. Story after story after story. We couldn't fit them all in because we had ultimately just tell one overall story. But Danny can tell you moment after moment of how him helping somebody else led to better things in his life. So I think overall, I think that's the message I hope everybody gets from this when they watch, is that here's a man that was on the brink of execution, and by deciding to do good and helping others, truly turned himself around to be one of the greatest transformations of human character that we've been able to capture in a documentary.
Wow. And I also noticed in this film that either directors that were interviewed or actors or anybody else, they also saw that in him, that they can actually not help him, but they continued on the relationship with him, especially Robert Rodriguez.
Yeah, I mean, Robert, saw that again when you see how funny and humorous Danny is in person. Robert witnessed that when they worked together, and he's like, I can't just use him for a bad guy. There's a totally other side of him that we need to put in. That's why they put him in Spy Kids as Uncle Machete, right? And Danny's actually doing almost a lot of comedies now. He's almost doing more comedies than he is action films because, the juxtaposition of seeing a guy that looks intimidating like him with such a great sense of humor is great, right? Like, I mean, right after we released the trailer, Saturday Night Live did that skit, like they're going to have a career like Danny Trejo, right? They're like, how it never gets old. I can be in everything. If your movie doesn't have Trejo, it's wacko, right? So it's an interesting position where he's become such a cultural icon and changing his, but when you hang out with him, it's hard not to notice he has those other elements.
Awesome. Now, when will the film be available, and on what formats can people access it?
Yeah, so it's in the US, it's available July 7th on all VOD platforms. So that's iTunes, Amazon, Google. Outside of the US, it's available actually a little earlier on June 22nd. It depends the territory, how it's available, but basically VOD. And in Canada, it's currently available on Super Channel.
Great. Well, I definitely have to recommend that everybody go watch it. And I want to thank you two gentlemen for coming out and talking to us today about this awesome documentary, Inmate #1, The Rise of Danny Trejo. Make sure you guys go see it. Again, thank you guys so much for your time today. And I want to just really quick say, make sure you guys follow Pastrami Nation on social media and visit us at pastramination.com. And thank you again for tuning in to Pastrami Nation.
Such a wonderful job, guys. I really enjoyed it.
Yes, thank you guys so much.
No, appreciate it. Thank you guys for enjoying the film. Thanks for having us on.
Yes,
Nolan, we appreciate it.
Very much.
Can't wait to see it again. Take care, guys.
Cheers. Take it easy.